Hello, Mrs. Livingston. I've been looking forward to our meeting. I have a couple of questions for you. The first question I have is about this Ability Awareness program notice I received. I've heard the term disability awareness about how everyone is different and has different challenges. So what's the difference between ability awareness and disability awareness? Or are they the same?
The main purpose of the program is the same, but the term ability awareness is more positive. It's what is referred to as people-first language, which focuses on the person and not a characteristic of the person. We prefer to focus on a person's abilities as opposed to labeling a person as disabled. We still use the term disability, but we can be thoughtful when we use it. It is okay to use words or phrases such as disabled, disability, or people with disabilities when talking about disability issues. If a person you're with has a disability, it is okay to ask them which terms they prefer. I think it's safe to say that we all want people to focus on us first and not one of our characteristics. I wouldn't like it if people referred to me as a black-haired teacher. I would much rather be the teacher with the black hair. Do you see how much better that sounds? The first example makes me sound like a witch, and the second example makes me sound like a raven-haired supermodel. Also, our children hear our words. If you have a child with a disability, you are a walking, talking example of how others should speak to and about your child. As your children develop their opinion of themselves, who they are, and their place in the world, they take your words to heart more than anyone else's. Would you rather have your child hear you refer to them as disabled or autistic, or do you think, my son who has autism, or my daughter who has a disability sounds better? Notice how the listener's focus stays with the first term used. Your child will hear my son or my daughter first.
The people-first language definitely sounds better, but it seems like it's always mentioning a person's disability. That doesn't seem right either. We don't want to continually point out any person's challenges, do we?
No, it's not something you would do when it is unnecessary or awkward. For example, you wouldn't say a person with deafness, you would say a deaf person, but you wouldn't mention any characteristic of a person unless it was necessary. My hair color, for example, although I love it, doesn't define me. I wouldn't want to constantly be referred to as the teacher with the black hair, as it is not a major part of my identity. But many people don't consider deafness or autism, for two examples, to be disabilities at all. That it's the attitude or prejudice about the word that needs to change, not the vocabulary. They consider it something to be proud of, and would prefer to be called a deaf person or an autistic person. It is a major part of their identity, and influences every aspect of their life experience. So like I said earlier, ask which terms they prefer.
Okay, so getting back to your program, I never had any type of disability or ability awareness training in school, ever. I never even knew how common disabilities are, or how large the community was, until my two younger sons were diagnosed with disabilities. Now it seems like there are just as many people with disabilities as without.
Well, as a parent of a child with a disability, or in my case, being a special education teacher, our everyday worlds include many opportunities to interact with people with disabilities. Not only your own children or students, but the other people whose paths you cross at the various places your child receives education or services. And that is an important factor of our Ability Awareness program. To give people who don't usually have those opportunities in their everyday world important information on how they should act and react during those interactions when they do happen. We also want to introduce our students to the correct assumption that people with disabilities are just as valuable to society as people without. That having a disability isn't something to make excuses for or be ashamed of, and definitely not something to criticize or mock. In fact, our Ability Awareness program partners nicely with our anti-bullying program, especially considering that 9 out of 10 children with disabilities will experience bullying at school. We want our school to be the exception to that rule. Ability awareness applies to all aspects of a person's life, at school, at home, in the community, and in society at large. Because it is so broadly important, it's important to have a thorough understanding of what it means to society and to each other. But, in order to give you a complete explanation, I'd like to give you a glimpse of the history of special education in our country, and what we now prefer to call ability awareness. I'd like you to see where we've come from, where we are now, and where we hope to go.
Students with disabilities in our nation have had a long fight and struggle towards acceptance, education, and inclusion in the classroom. Starting during the Enlightenment period, disabled students began to receive proper facilities and treatment beyond even public high school. The 19th century looked towards education of disabled citizens as a way to protect non-disabled children in society from those with disabilities. Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet founded the first American institution for individuals with disabilities in 1817. Gallaudet believed it was his moral and spiritual responsibility to educate the disabled. He created the Connecticut Asylum for the education and instruction of deaf and dumb persons under the notion that it is of strong importance to awaken the consciousness of God within everyone. After the founding of this institution by 1860, 28 of the 33 states had created an asylum. However, the average age of students in these institutions was 22. Thus, children with disabilities were not receiving any support. In 1846, Samuel Gridley Howe, a Harvard-educated physician, began a campaign for funding aimed at the Massachusetts state legislature with the purpose of creating a school for the disabled. Howe was successful, and by 1848, Howe received state funding for an experimental school for the teaching and training of idiotic children in Boston, the Perkins Institute. In 1866, Edward Seguin, a physician and educator in Paris, influenced educational methods for the disabled, and his influence is still felt today. He recommended that schools should maintain a smaller population of students so educators can get to know, care for, and plan for their students appropriately. In addition, Seguin recommended that the facilities be located in rural areas and that the schools focus on the education of motor, sensory, physical training, intellectual training, and socialization. Sadly, in the late 19th century, American society went backwards in their views of mental handicaps, and many began to fear these citizens. Americans created two solutions for mental disabilities: sterilization and segregation, resulting in institutionalization. And unfortunately, through institutionalization, students with disabilities received horrendous living conditions, inappropriate treatment and abuse, and unsuitable, if any, education for functioning with their disability. Fortunately, along with the 20th century came a rise in increased awareness, treatment, and most importantly, legislation to support students with disabilities. Beginning with the compulsory education laws of 1917, special education classes were enacted into the school systems. Because of these laws, schools were no longer allowed to ignore intellectually disabled students. However, integrated classes with intellectually disabled students were poorly run by teachers who were unenthusiastic towards running these inclusive classrooms. Thus, classes became segregated to meet the laws and the wishes of the teachers, rather than meeting the needs of the students. It was not until the Russian launch of Sputnik, which provoked a positive emphasis on American education and positively affected special education, that John F. Kennedy introduced the National Action to Combat Mental Retardation. In January 1971, the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children, PARC, brought a class action lawsuit against the common law of Pennsylvania in federal district court. PARC was resolved by the agreement that all children with mental disabilities between ages 6 and 21 must be provided with free public education. Cases similar to PARC were filed across the country. However, many students with disabilities continued to be denied adequate public education. The first federal legislation to advance opportunities for students with disabilities was the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, which called for quality in activities and ensured that proper facilities were constructed. In 1975, the Education of All Handicapped Children Act, which was later named Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 1990, mandated the free and appropriate education for students with disabilities. The legislation is a combination of the Civil Rights Act and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. In 1997, President Clinton signed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act Amendment, which amended and reauthorized the IDEA. This act was to improve the performance and achievement of students with disabilities in the special as well as the general education curriculum. As a result of the various reforms and legislation, today special education implements early intervention, highly trained educators, and appropriate facilities, characteristics of schools which didn't exist in the earlier centuries. Following the passing of the No Child Left Behind Act in 2001, students with disabilities can no longer be excluded from the school's accountability systems because of the fear that if they were excluded, these students would be ignored. During the required assessments, these children are allowed accommodations, modifications, or alternate assessments under IDEA. The special education teachers are required to conduct meaningful assessments, interpret the results, and utilize programs and strategies that will enhance the student's learning. Today, Americans with disabilities are given more opportunities than ever before. With the passage of the ADA Amendments Act of 2008, a broader definition of what constitutes a disability has been established, and in turn, students with less physically obvious disabilities, such as autism spectrum disorders, are allocated the same resources as those with obvious physical disabilities. For much of the 20th century, students with mental disabilities were often characterized as either eccentric or mentally retarded, but a deeper understanding of diversity combined with recent awareness of autism spectrum disorders has led to new innovations in special education. Nationally, 61% of students across all disability categories are placed in general education classes 80% of the time or more. The introduction of inclusive education for students with disabilities is gaining widespread popularity. Through education reform, students with disabilities are also given opportunities beyond the compulsory education classroom. At the College of New Jersey's Career and Community Studies program, students with mental disabilities learn to acclimate to adult life and are provided equal access to collegiate services through integrated classes, vocational opportunities, and student mentors. Through this and other supportive programs, the integration, acceptance, and education of students with disabilities is supported, and disabled students are provided as much as possible equal opportunities in education.
So the video mentions a number of enacted laws. Is there a law requiring schools to teach this history of special education and disability awareness?
The federal government encourages it, but education law is made by each state. And many states do have those laws. Delaware, Kansas, Maryland, New York, Virginia, Washington State, New Brunswick, Canada even, but not California, not yet. But we're working on it.
So, you mentioned where you hope to go. Other than teaching the history of special education, what else is there to teach?
In a nutshell, boatloads. A law can only do so much. A school could just show a couple of videos and meet their legal requirements. Don't get me wrong though, teaching the history is very important. As the famous Spanish philosopher George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And if you are not aware of it, you cannot remember it. After watching a video like the one we saw earlier, you might think, okay, people with disabilities used to be mistreated, but they're not now, and that doesn't have anything to do with me. Then you still don't know how to interact with a person with disabilities. So what good is it if you don't know what you're supposed to actually do about it today, in your lifetime? Our approach is more of a practical approach. How do we put what we know into practice? It's easy enough to tell a student to be accepting, but what does that really tell the student? It's like telling a student to be good. It's not nearly enough information. It's more effective to show a student how to be good, and in this case, how to show acceptance. We teach our students not just to be aware that different people have different abilities and challenges, but what it means to them and what it looks like in action, in the classroom, on the playground, in the lunch line, and how to practice their ability awareness in everyday life. A law wouldn't go nearly far enough to affect a typical student's interaction with people with disabilities.
I get that laws don't always produce the desired results. It's like there are a lot of people that have driver's licenses, but there are a lot of accidents and a lot of discourteous drivers. And I seem to meet them all in the school drop-off area.
Our Ability Awareness program focuses on the practical aspects of interacting with others with a variety of abilities, and in a variety of settings. We have another very important goal too. Not only do we want to improve the quality of the interactions between all students, we also want to increase the number of socially appropriate interactions between all students, regardless of ability. We want the students with special needs to have the same number of opportunities to interact with their peers as typical students do. And we want their peers to get to know them. We want to create a familiarity between all of our students. Familiarity is the most successful precursor there is to acceptance. In fact, it is the only one that I know of. And that's not just my opinion. That's also the opinion of neuroscientist Peggy Mason. According to Dr. Mason, who studies empathy at the neurobiology department at the University of Chicago, we can learn to overcome our biases and fear of people who are different from us in an incredibly simple way. By having a positive experience with just one representative of a group, our future interactions with all persons of that group will be changed. We will be more accepting and empathetic. Just one positive experience, that's all it takes. Through our Ability Awareness program, we are creating that positive experience, which we know has the potential to change a student's outlook regarding all people for life. Let's take a look at this video and see what happens when people become familiar with others who appear different from themselves.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think.
That seems like a ton of complex information to teach elementary school children in such a short period of time. What is it, a day? A week?
Although our themed ability awareness presentation is usually a single presentation, always close to the beginning of the year so that we can start out on the right foot, Our entire Ability Awareness program is truly year-round. By the time our students leave our school, they've had 6 years of Ability Awareness training. In fact, our first 6-year graduates will be heading off to middle school next year with an understanding of Ability Awareness that we hope they will pass on to their new classmates and peers who haven't had the opportunity to experience the same training. Our goal is for our students to leave our school with confidence in their ability to interact with all people, and to automatically, without thinking about it, look beyond differences. Among other things, these graduates have been taught to respect ability, to show respect to all people, regardless of ability, to have a can-do attitude for themselves and in their support of others, that many people use alternate forms of communication, and communication is more than words, to assume competence in others regardless of ability, and that everyone is capable of giving and receiving support regardless of ability. Our students are the future hiring managers, the future lawmakers, the future teachers, bus drivers, police officers, speech therapists, the future everything. We want them to leave our school with an inclusive mindset, and we have the expectation that they will pass that mindset on to their families and communities. Let me show you what happens when people have an inclusive mindset.
I work at an agency right now. It's really important to have a job. You keep focusing on your work and you actually look better about yourself. I do like coffees, check the conference rooms, wrap up the phones, and then I sort out the mails and do the packages.
We are a marketing and advertising firm. We have been around for many years. The hiring process was great. We met her. She was one of 3 candidates that we were going to meet with, and we knew right away that she was the best fit for our company.
The position was actually ultimately built for Maggie. However, the jobs are all in place. Like, we had the need specifically for all those tasks. And as we got to think about how do we kind of, quite candidly, be more inclusive in this world, is how do you take some things that are necessary and make sure the jobs are real? So what we did is we asked our office manager to kind of break down all the things that she does and is responsible for, and kind of look at the areas of opportunities of things that she did with regularity and things that she didn't get to with regularity. And could somebody like Maggie actually help take some of those tasks off? So once we did that, it became easy to say, hey, there are a bunch of things that would be very meaningful to the company, and then be, obviously change the environment and kind of allow people here understand that there's a greater, world of individuals that can actually be very helpful and participatory in helping us build a business.
It was great to have a job coach there to kind of help, go through the needs and the process of working with Maggie, making sure she was understanding everything. Maggie is a very smart and intelligent individual, so having the job coach there, it helped not just me, but also my peers that I work with here and Maggie to understand the functionality of her tasks and what her expectations are.
Basically, just act as a natural support system for her when she's at work. And I come once a week and basically come in and see what Maggie's working on, see her task list for the day, talk to her about how she thinks she's doing, and anything that she might need some help with. I'm just there to kind of support her in that way.
Well, I like my job because it's like a lot of fun and get to visit other people. I do have independence a lot.
She does her job well, okay? She's never late. She never leaves early. She shows up and she executes her job at the best of her abilities, like everybody else. But then what makes it unique is the people here, they actually can't believe an environment without Maggie here. Okay, also because of the work she's doing and the way that she goes about her work. No different than any other employee that we have here that's a superstar.
Okay, so getting down to the basics, how do you go about teaching these things?
Ability awareness, like any subject, can be broken down into manageable steps. As I mentioned earlier, each year we present a unique theme, and each theme is intended to break down psychological barriers that exist when a person comes in contact with someone who looks or acts differently than they are familiar with, and to build familiarity between students. We present examples of interactions by demonstrating what to do and what not to do. We allow the students to practice different methods of communication, like using sign language and communication devices. We give the students bracelets with that year's motto as a reminder of what they've learned. We set up tables. We bring in therapy dogs. One year, we brought in a therapy horse. We invite speakers and presenters with disabilities to demonstrate the bases of our themes. One year, we brought in a girl with cerebral palsy who rides a skateboard. One year, we invited an author to read the book she wrote about her son who has Down syndrome. We read books on the subject of acceptance and people with disabilities. We put together skits. We even gave a musical presentation. We involve as many students in the presentation as possible, which provides the best kind of peer influence. We create inclusive activities to bring all of our students together, such as a dance during lunch. Yes, people with disabilities can dance.
And how do you know that the students are getting it?
We create ways for the students to demonstrate what they've learned. One year, we followed up the Ability Awareness presentation with a poster competition, allowing the children to create art based on what they had learned. One year, we interviewed the graduating students about what the Ability Awareness program had meant to them and what they felt they had learned from it. We then presented the interview film as part of the next year's Ability Awareness presentation. But the most obvious example of a successful program is observing the interactions between the students immediately, as in the same day after the presentation. It's like the kids can't wait to put what they've learned into practice. It is a joy to behold. The students also don't hesitate to approach staff for strategy ideas and advice during playground interactions.
Have you gotten any feedback from parents related to the program?
Well, let's listen to what one parent wrote about the impact the program had on her child.
My child is popular. Schoolmates wrangle for his attention. Why? Is he particularly handsome? Well, I think so. But that's not it. An exceptional athlete, maybe. Well, he tries. My son has autism. I used to worry that he wouldn't make any friends. Today, I worry that he may become conceited. Seriously, I actually had that thought. So what's the story? How did this social situation, unusual for someone with autism, come to be? In my opinion, it is the Mission Meadows Ability Awareness Program. With a focused theme each year, such as this year's Assume Competence, the entire student body continuously learns about disabilities and practices appropriate social interactions. Ability acceptance has become the norm, and frankly, also cool. I am grateful to the Vista Unified School District for its dedication to this successful program. The results are indisputably clear. Next year, my son is off to middle school in a whole new batch of worries. Girls.
Our students with special needs become not only accepted by their peers, but supported and celebrated by their peers. In fact, another thing we learned from our program was that we need to prepare our students with special needs for the increase in social interaction, which is frankly a wonderful problem to have.
So let's say that I wanted to start an ability awareness program in my older son's middle school. What would I need to do?
Well, if your child is in the Vista Unified School District, you're in luck, because ability awareness programs are supported in our district. You can contact them directly with your ideas. Our program started small initially from a conversation between a parent and a teacher. Then, with the principal's endorsement and help from a couple of teachers and a few parents, we kicked it off. Today, it has grown to include mainstream teachers, parents, speech and occupational therapists, and whole classrooms of students. I think it is accurate to say that it has become one of the most popular and anticipated assembly presentations of the year. I am also happy to report that our staff is learning alongside our students. As a result of support from the school's principal and the district, support from the rest of the school staff has grown, and not just teachers. We get support from administrative staff, the PTA, and even facilities staff pitches in to help. Just as you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, you hadn't had any ability awareness in school. We are all learning from each other, which is just as important, as not all staff, all adults for that matter, are in the same place as to their understanding of ability awareness. Another example of how a program like this has far-reaching influence in the community.
Thank you, Mrs. Livingston. This has been most informative. Can you think of anything else you would like me to know about your program before I give you my next question?
Yes, I want you to know that like anything else, ability awareness is never one and done. It is an ongoing process. There is always something more to teach, and there is always something more to learn for all of us.
And now for my second question. Seriously, what's with all this homework?